My name is Eman. I'm 27 years old. I'm half Egyptian, half Palestinian. I grew up between Egypt and Missouri, sort of switching back and forth between the two. And I'm currently a PhD candidate in sociology at NYU. I've been a socialist since reading Marx at the age of 14 and being like, word, that makes a lot of sense. My socialism has developed. I tend to think that capitalism is at the root of pretty much all of our social ills and has some way that it plays a lot into all the oppressions that we face. So for me, I don't see issues of sexuality or race or gender as separate from issues of economic justice. Capitalism has done a really good job of dividing us and has done a really good job of objectifying our bodies and just basically stealing from generation after generation of people who aren't at the top. So socialism really affects every type of political activity that I'm in. There's no separation for me between all of these things. Queer, some people use the word queer to mean an umbrella term that encompasses all kinds of sexual identities outside of the straight norm. Others use the term queer to express an intentionally political sexual identity. That is an identity that purposefully goes against the norms of who we're supposed to desire and what our sexuality is supposed to look like. So for me, the term queer is both expressive of who I am and also expressive of my politics and the world I want to live in. Being Muslim and queer, the way I cope with being Muslim and queer is by building queer Muslim spaces and engaging them. There have been so many moments where I felt like my queerness was invisible in a mainstream Muslim space, and there have been equally or even more moments where I felt like my Muslimness had to be invisible in gay spaces. I research Muslims in America of all different paths and walks of life. I think this group really catches my interest, partially because I grew up Muslim in America, and I think that was a really interesting experience. In some ways, research is also always autobiographical. We're trying to study what happened to us or what our to study the social processes that affected our life. So for me, what I'm really interested in is how people move through Muslim communities, how they build those communities sometimes from scratch, or how they move in and out of the communities that exist, and then how those communities in turn affect the individuals that walk through them. So I think American Muslims are so fascinating because there's such a heterogeneous group of experiences, and they're really at an intersection of so many different identities. American Islam looks really different in the suburbs versus in the city, in a working class neighborhood versus a rich neighborhood. It looks very different for men than it does for women. It looks very different for trans folks than it does for cis folks. It looks very different for straight folks than it does for queer folks. And so Muslims are constantly in this process of negotiation that I think actually reflects what a lot of people in the US are going through. So it makes it really ripe for study. Throughout my adulthood, really, I've been involved in a lot of different things. I've done a lot of Palestine work in college and then in grad school. I did some labor organizing in our union at NYU, and I've been involved in building queer Muslim spaces here in New York City. I think I think the American labor movement has a lot of potential. This thing that makes unions unique is that you're able to bring people together that you otherwise wouldn't be able to reach if you were sort of in a pure movement space. So being able to get people to show up to rallies, being able to get people to show up to meetings is really difficult. And that's because there's a structural problem, right? There's a reach problem, right? Where do you find people? How do you get them to come together? Especially if they're people from different socioeconomic statuses and these kinds of things. So if we had a robust labor movement that actually spread across different industries, we could actually reach so many more people to plug them into existing political struggles. So it's not even just about working place conditions, which of course are a huge priority, but it's also about being able to mobilize large swaths of people. And that's really been a struggle for the American left. One really exciting example of this is the Labor for Black Lives group that just started up in New York City. A couple of comrades and colleagues of mine started it up. And it's a group that follows Black leadership in the movement for Black lives, and just tries to plug workers in systematically to aiding those efforts. So not taking over, not doing its own thing, but actually following Black leadership and plugging people into whatever rally is going on, whatever movement, campaign, that type of thing. The thing I'm most proud of in recent organizing efforts is the passing of the BDS vote at NYU. So we actually passed it through our union. I was involved in the beginning of that campaign when I was still in the country. And really that was a huge moment because 10 years ago, you never would have thought that at NYU we would have BDS vote pass. So we're really in a really exciting time in terms of fighting for Palestinian liberation. We've done a lot of work and it's really starting to pay off. Professionally, I want to pursue a trajectory of work in academia. I'm hoping to continue to pursue academic positions after my PhD is over. On the personal end, I've been talking with some friends about building a queer Muslim commune, what it would look like to live collectively in a way that sort of embodies our principles of, sharing and communal labor and these types of things. I'm constantly trying to think about ways to pursue liberation with other people who are interested in that, whether that's through organizing or studying different models for the future. I think the trajectory that I hope for the world is revolutionary and radical, but one day at a time.
If you enjoyed the video, then make sure you visit shadowproof.com/donate.